Welcome to A Better Question. I'm Jonathan, and today we're talking about rich people, poor people, and the very, very few people in between. Right now there's a huge debate going on about economic inequality, and like an idiot, I thought it would be easy to explain. 6 weeks, a few hundred pages of data, and several dozen articles later, I think I finally have some decent questions for you. So today I'm asking, what's this debate really about? How does economic inequality relate to unequal opportunity? Is the current situation really that bad? And how likely are you to become a millionaire? It's the American dream versus Dream On America, so let's get to it. At the very heart of this issue, there are two major debates. The first one is really about wealthy people themselves. Did they earn and do they deserve the rewards that they collect? Are they contributing more than they take? Is inequality actually a good thing? Or did most of them just get lucky or cheat to amass their fortunes? And are they using those fortunes to screw over the rest of us? Honestly, that's the more important half of all this, but discussions about economic inequality rarely get that far because they're derailed by the second debate. People want to believe that they are the masters of their own destiny. Who wouldn't? It's called the self-serving or self-enhancing bias. It's the tendency to attribute our successes to our own actions and our failures to things outside of our control. And humans are wired to suck at this kind of self-reflection. That second argument is about how much control you have over your own economic future. And because biases affect everybody, this happens on both sides of this argument in both directions. Some successful people give themselves way too much credit. Some poor people make stupid choices and then blame anything but themselves. Arguments over which group is more delusional end up consuming any discussion about economic inequality. The first group thinks the second is defeatist or lazy, and the second group thinks the first is unrealistic or callous. Both sides are dedicated and feel good about their own message. And the whole topic is muddy and personal enough that both sides can declare victory and go home safe in the knowledge that they are right. So let's just get this argument out of the way. If you believe that everyone, more or less, has an equal opportunity for success, then it is kind of stupid to be pissed off at the people who do succeed. Especially if you think that you yourself are just a lot of hard work and determination away from being one of those people. Supporting policies that make it any less awesome to be rich will just make things harder for future you. And Americans, more than any other developed economy, continually emphasize personal agency and dismiss circumstances as determinant of lifetime success. In fact, in 2015, out of 44 countries, the US was tied for second, along with the UK and Uganda, for having the most people agree with the statement that the main cause of inequality is that some people work harder than others. 71% of Americans say it's the individual that determines their own economic mobility, not outside forces. And unsurprisingly, the richer you are, the more likely you are to think this way. The majority of America's richest people think that poor people have it easy because they can get government benefits without doing anything in return. And even more of them are certain that government can't afford to do more for the needy. This is a long-standing trend in America, and America's odd form of economic optimism is also self-reinforcing. Here's an example. Of the top 10 personal finance books for sale on Amazon, 5 of them offer to teach you to be rich. It's actually the title of the number 10 book. There's a multi-billion-dollar industry of books, articles, courses, YouTube channels, effing diets that all depend on the idea that being rich is a trainable skill. Without that belief, their products are worthless. And lucky for them, most of us do believe this. In 2019, 60% of Americans said that they would be wealthy in their lifetimes. More than half of them said it would happen in the next 10 years. And by wealthy, these Americans meant a net worth of at least $2.27 million, which is about 8 times more money than the median net worth of America's richest age bracket. You know, those folks who've been saving the longest and frankly had the easiest start when they were younger. There's also the fact that people who actually have $3 million continually say it would take $6 to $7 million for them to feel rich. All of this might sound a little delusional, but according to Forbes, almost 70% of the 400 richest Americans are self-made. 9 out of the 10 richest people in the world are self-made. And Fidelity Investments says that 88% of millionaires made their fortunes from scratch. So sit down, skeptics. Doubts are for poor people. These rags to riches success stories that fill our media help to explain survey results like these. If you ask Americans what factors determine if you're successful or not, here's what they say are the most important. Hard work, ambition, staying healthy, getting yourself a good education, a stable family growing up, state of the economy. Skipping a few and way down at the bottom of the list are coming from a wealthy family, luck, race, and sex. Another poll from the Cato Institute shows the same thing. Causes of wealth, grit and ambition. Causes of poverty, poor life choices and drugs. But there's something else in this survey that gives one possible explanation for America's unique beliefs. The survey report provides the following information. 84% of Americans say that there's nothing wrong with a person trying to make as much money as they honestly can. This quote is the fourth bolded statement in the entire report, and it's repeated 5 times in 2 separate sections, interspersed with other data from this September 2019 survey. The only problem is that this quote is from a book published in 1984, which relies on surveys done in the late 1970s. So why is this information repeated here with no obvious indication that it actually came from a survey conducted more than 40 years ago? It might have to do with the fact that the Cato Institute started life as the Charles Koch Foundation way back in 1974, and it continues to be funded by Charles Koch to this day. The Cato Institute is a non-profit educational charity, and it's number 10 on the list of most influential US think tanks. And by sheer coincidence, I'm sure, the Koch family is the second richest family in America. The huge wealth inequality that we see today allows some people to use their resources to influence everyone else. Understanding why Americans think the way that they do is obviously complicated. But there was one survey question that I think sheds some light on whether the hard work or circumstance position is the closest one to most Americans' lived reality. When Americans were asked which one or two of the following do you think most likely contributes to someone moving down the economic ladder, here's what they said. So when it comes to why somebody else might fall down the economic ladder, 5 of the top 6 reasons named were partially or completely inside the realm of personal control. Yet when these same Americans turned that question on themselves and responded about what they were worried about in their own life, here's what they said. None of the top reasons named were something that you could completely control, and 3 of the top 6 were not up to the individual at all. This survey shows people answering one question with their beliefs about others, and the second question with their actual lived reality. Which makes more sense when you look into those rags to riches stories and find out that they're not true. But you wouldn't know it by reading the news article. As far as that 88% of millionaires is concerned, if you actually look at the source for the article, you find out that it's 88% of millionaires that self-identify as self-made. Yet these facts are all over the place. As for Forbes and that story that 60% of people on their Forbes 400 are self-made, they actually made a rating system. Anything over 5 out of 10 is self-made. That list includes the son of a successful dentist and psychiatrist who was offered free college tuition or a McDonald's franchise when he graduated high school. It was the same offer his parents made to each of their 3 kids. Yet he scores an 8 out of 10 on the self-made scale. In fact, only 35% of list members come from a middle class or poorer background. And even that 35% would include these 2 guys, who each score a 9 out of 10, but both got $1 million plus loans from family members. Giving each of these guys a 9 out of 10 self-made score while ignoring $1 million investments from family is sort of like saying Neil Armstrong got to the moon by climbing down some stairs. Forbes publishes this list every year and has been doing it for decades. They say that it instills confidence that the American dream is still very much alive. You would think if it was so healthy they wouldn't have to fudge the edges so much, but maybe that's just how media works. Maybe everyone really does have all the pieces that they need to become rich. And maybe most of those financial gurus really do know how to put those pieces together. Just because most people think they'll get rich and don't, doesn't mean that they never had a chance to in the first place. If everyone has a fair shot, who cares whether or not this millionaire or that billionaire really made their money from scratch? So let's figure out how much of your economic fate is determined by your own choices, and how much is outside your control. What are the odds that you will be rich someday, and what would you have to do to get there? Since the 1970s, all other things being equal, you're far less likely to be born into a middle-class household today than you were then. And even if you are, you're less likely to have that home be a stable 2-parent household. Even if it is, your household will probably pull in just as much money as the one from 50 years ago. Which are all reasons that the odds of you being more financially successful than your parents are now more of a coin toss than a sure thing. But maybe this isn't the economy, it's just society. Maybe people today are just shittier people than they were back then. How do we know that this has anything to do with inequality? Well, for one, these changes coincide identically with growing wealth inequality, which I'll talk about in a different video, but these statistics also get skewed even more when you compare the rich and the poor. Over their lifetime, right now, a person who grows up in a household in the bottom 20% of income brackets has a 70% chance to stay in the bottom 40%, never making it to the middle class. But economic mobility does happen. The biggest factors are graduating college, getting married, and having your marriage be a dual earner household. If you're born into a home at the bottom 20% of incomes, those things alone give you a better than 80% chance to jump up a tier by the time you're in your 30s. Though you still only have a 50-50 shot at joining the middle class. But let's say you're one of the 17% who scrambles up 2 tiers. Well, don't get divorced. If you do, and you probably will, you're now just as likely to fall all the way back down to the bottom 20% as you would be if you never went to college at all. At least that's if you're a man. It's actually more than 3 times as likely to send you there if you're a woman. Turns out that your sex matters to your overall odds. You know, that thing that Americans thought was dead last as a predictor of economic success. Being a divorced woman is actually a stronger predictor that you'll be in the bottom 20% of incomes than heroin use is for men. When you're poor, you're far, far more likely to report severe relationship stress, and therefore far more likely to get divorced. You're more likely to hate your job. You're way more likely to lose your job, all while constantly being stressed out about paying your bills and having shitty health insurance, at best. If you don't get divorced, just make sure you don't have an unexpected medical expense, or you're pretty much screwed. It's the #1 cause of personal bankruptcies. So yeah, your health, your relationship, and your education are up to you, but the fact is, stress basically melts you from the inside out, which is why people in the top income bracket can expect to have 9 more healthy years of life than those in the poorest. And the chances of experiencing a loss of more than 50% of your yearly income over a 2-year period have doubled since 1970. An experience that could cause what researchers call economic shock, which doubles your odds of straight up dying. And we're still just talking small potatoes. Income is by far the smaller part of economic inequality. Income is important because, well, you have to have it to buy wealth, but you can only do that if you have more income than your debts, which is getting harder to do. 47% of American households could not scrape together $400 without borrowing from someone or selling something. Incomes for most Americans have stagnated since the 1980s. What hasn't stagnated? Things to spend your income on. The cost of rent since 1970 went up 170%. Tuition prices, 300%. Childcare spending, 16% since 1990. Healthcare costs, 140% since 2014 alone. And while a typical house might cost you 2 times your yearly salary back in 1970, it'll now take roughly 6 times a US median income to buy a home. And we're still just talking about getting past the bottom 60-ish% of incomes. We're not even touching wealth. Right now, the cost of investing in yourself, coupled with the cost of simply treading water, and the catastrophic implications of literally any mistake or bout of financial hardship, never mind all the stress that comes along with all of this, all contribute to making this one of the most difficult periods to achieve intergenerational wealth mobility in US history. While 70% of US households have less than $1,000 in savings, which is a pre-pandemic late 2019 figure, by the way, the Walton family owns as much as the bottom 32% of all American households combined. The richest 25 Americans own as much as the bottom 45% of households combined. Which pretty much means that giving investment advice or talking about the stock market to the vast majority of Americans is like hosting a cooking show in North Korea. Most people are gonna have a hard time using the advice that you're handing out, and you'd be a bit of an asshole for ignoring that fact. Facing these financial challenges is possible, certainly. It's just harder than it was, which goes a long way in explaining why millennials at 25 own about half as much wealth as Gen X did at the same age, despite being more numerous and better educated. And no, we can't blame that on them getting useless degrees in film theory and basket weaving. Still, rich people have to play by all the same rules, right? Well, it kind of depends on what you mean by rich. That group of people who fall into the 80th to 95th percentile by income, they're pretty rich compared to the rest of us. They have investments, they might own a business, they go on vacation, they own at least one home, and they can pay for their kids' schooling. As you move up this scale, you're gonna find people with a vacation home or two, people who go on way cooler trips more often, and who have kids in private schooling. These are the doctors and lawyers with successful private practices, and executives and owners of mid-sized businesses. But to get into that bracket, all you have to do is make more than $110,000 a year. In this bracket, we're way more likely to be talking about people who actually came from a more modest background. But even at this level, the rules are different. For example, you're far more likely to inherit money. Between 1989 and 2007, more than 30% of households in this income bracket inherited money. If you go up the net worth scale to $500,000, 40 to 45% of households inherited money in that same time period, worth a median dollar amount of anywhere from $200,000 to $800,000. Whereas households worth less than $25,000, only 9% inherited money, with a median inheritance of around $21,000. If you're in that 80%, you're also way less likely to get divorced. The top 80% of incomes consistently have 80% marriage rates, with more than 90% of kids growing up in homes with two married parents. And because richer people marry richer people, these effects become systemic over generations. You're way more likely to go to college too. In 2003, 74% of college students came from households in the top 25% of incomes. Let's talk about millionaires for a second. People in this higher income bracket are way more likely to become millionaires, meaning their total assets are worth more than $1 million. And actually, a graduate degree gives a person a whopping 37% chance that they will become a millionaire in their lifetimes, if they're white. Race was that thing that Americans ranked the least important factor in determining success. But while a white person with a graduate degree has a 37% chance of becoming a millionaire in their lifetime, simply being black slashes that rate to 6.7%. Economists figure that in our current environment, it's likely that more than 60% of your lifetime income is determined by your circumstances at birth and how you grow up. Which is why the richest 20% are spending at least 3 times more on securing advantages for their children than they were 40 years ago. And no one else can even begin to compete. But there's one more group to address in all of this, the 1%. Because while the 80%ers have a lot of advantages, people who make up America's richest 1% can pretty much do whatever they want. Here's how. You basically don't have to pay taxes. There's a bunch of different ways to stop everyone else in the country from getting their peasant mitts all over your fortune. You can donate money to a charity, and it counts against your taxable income, which determines how much you pay in capital gains taxes, which are the taxes you would pay when your assets appreciate. If you pay them at all, those tax rates are always lower than income taxes, and the richest 10% own pretty much all the assets. The Trump tax cuts suspended the limits on these deductions, so if you donate enough to get below a certain tax bracket, you pay no capital gains taxes at all. Because your capital gains tax rate is based on your other income, you could also lower your rate by making all your money through capital gains and only drawing a small salary, like say $81,000 a year or $1. But if you're more socially minded and you want to maybe challenge the scientific consensus on global warming, or put out a survey report that tells people why rich people are great, or that explains why environmental regulations are bad and corporate taxes are evil, you can just start a charity and donate to that. Or you could buy a bunch of land and put a conservational easement on it. Or you could set up your own bank or an entire accounting firm just for you. And honestly, you don't really need income anyway. As long as the stocks that you own aren't tax sheltered like the 401ks that pretty much everyone else owns, you can borrow money against those stocks. And then you can just use that loan to start a business or do whatever else you want to do. It's not like the bank doesn't know you're good for it and maybe you own the bank anyway. But if you really want to be a force for change, you could buy a politician or two who could introduce anti-union laws, or you could start an economic and social propaganda company. Or you could use your influence over any given major corporation to tell them what you want them to do. After all, that top 1% owns more than 53% of all company stocks in the United States. And every time there's a recession or some middle-class dupe has a business go under or a house foreclosed on, you're in the perfect position to buy up those assets for pennies on the dollar. Challenging anyone in this wealth bracket would be like playing Monopoly with somebody who has an unlimited amount of get-out-of-jail-free cards, who can roll however many times they want, who can change any rule, and who pays for things directly from either the games bank or the 2 other banks that they brought with them just to make sure this goes how it's supposed to go. All while they themselves feel an earnest sense of awe at their own brilliance and encourage you to do something with your bootstraps. Yeah! As for the rest of us, poorer people actually tend to pay higher rates of property taxes. Rich people manage to evade taxes on huge portions of their fortunes, usually through legal loopholes that they helped create, but even illegally, the IRS is unlikely to do anything about it. I mean, for f***'s sake, the amount of money that the wealthiest Americans dodge on their taxes every year is roughly 2.5 times the amount it would take to pay the tuition costs of every student at every 4-year state university in the entire country. Which gives us one last easy demonstration of the advantages wealth can bring. Not all inheritances come in cash. What about genetics? If rich people get rich because they're smart, then rich kids are probably going to be smarter too. And with that advantage, they'll grow up to be rich adults. Sure, evolution is a ruthless bastard, but it's not the kid's fault. Even at 2 years old, kids from poorer families have lower IQs than kids from rich families, by about 4%. By the time those kids turned 16, that divide had increased to nearly 15%. The fact is, there's absolutely a correlation between high IQ and socioeconomic success. It's difficult to figure out whether this gap comes from pure genetics or from advantages enjoyed in a richer household. Just like there's a correlation between high SAT scores and a wealthy upbringing. This could be because of great genetics, but it also could be a great way to see who can pay for tutors and prep courses. Consider this. Kids adopted into richer families end up having a measurably higher IQ as adults than those adopted into poorer families, by about 16%. And according to the National Association for Gifted Children, an upper-class child who scores well on standardized math and reading tests is about twice as likely to receive extra gifted child services than a child from a poor family who scores just as well in the same school. And if you score in the top 20% on standardized testing as a child, but you come from the poorest of households, you're less likely to graduate college than somebody who scores in the bottom 20% on those tests who was born to wealthy parents. Trying to pin down who is and isn't self-made is like arguing over who has or hasn't climbed Mount Everest. Seems pretty simple at first. But if a helicopter drops you off 1,000 feet from the summit, does that count? Exactly how far can you ride the helicopter before I climbed Mount Everest becomes I took a personal tour of the top? Is climbing Mount Everest incredibly difficult? Of course it is. Is it risky? Absolutely. But pretending that it's only about hard work and personal choice is ludicrous. And this whole debate about whether success is determined by personal agency or circumstances is like saying that everyone who hasn't climbed Mount Everest simply lacks determination and work ethic, while ignoring the $90,000 of personal support and equipment involved in each attempt. Not to mention the freedom each climber must have to take time off to go, and, you know, the f***ing helicopter. How we got into this situation is complicated. What to do about it is even more complicated. But as things stand right now, the richest Americans are reaping outsized rewards from an economic system that they almost completely control, and one which has become increasingly hostile to even the upper middle class. The fact is, there's still opportunity in America. It's still totally possible to improve your economic situation, and to be honest, working your ass off and getting an advanced education are still the most reliable ways to do that. Yes, there are things a person can do to give themselves better odds, but there's things our society could do to lower the odds of a catastrophe too. The cumulative effects of some of these economic, health, lifestyle, and legal advantages are pretty obvious. But there are other less obvious advantages too. Here's an example. Did you know that you are expected to write a thank you letter to your interviewers when you interview for a professional position? If you come from a working class household, why would you know that? Who would tell you? Your lack of etiquette might sink an otherwise competitive interview cycle, and you would never know why. The huge gap between the rich and the poor in our society isn't just about income and wealth. It's also about possibility. It's about even having the chance to get lucky, and about how lucky you have to get to be okay. The thing is, nobody needs to climb Mount Everest. So if you want to ignore circumstances and eagerly give too much credit to the haves and assign blame to the have-nots, doesn't really matter. But we're doing the same thing as a society while talking about who has a shot at a decent life. And bickering about who's right keeps distracting us from the real issue. How to fix it. Hello everyone, it's been quite a while. I got into this topic thinking I would do a quick piece about self-made billionaires, and of course I decided that I was going to explain wealth inequality in America and around the world to everybody. So if that's a topic that interests you, please share any questions you might have in the comments below. If you're somebody who wants to do research or who talks about this topic, head over to the community page because there are pages and pages of sources that you will probably find helpful. Quick update on the channel, we're about to hit 1,500 subscribers, I hope, and we're about to pass the magical 4,000 watched hours mark to get monetized on YouTube. Any help that you can offer to help the channel pass that milestone would be greatly appreciated. That means liking and subscribing and commenting on videos and sharing them around the internet if you're so inclined. Thank you so much for watching this video and the channel and for engaging with the community. And we're gonna do a giveaway once we hit that 1,500 subscriber mark. I'll do an announcement about this soon. It will probably be tied to comments on a different video. Patreon members will have their own separate giveaway. Thanks again, everybody. It's good to be back. I've missed you. I'll see you soon.